Sex, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the speculative interdimensional vehicle, Sex in Space. Its mission, to explore new points of view, to seek out fresh opinions, to boldly go where so many have gone before, and still somehow manage to totally miss the point. Subscribe to Sex in Space, wherever quality podcasts are found.
On this episode of the podcast, we were thrilled to be joined by Lucy Sante, a Belgian-born American writer, teacher, and critic who has contributed to the New York Review of Books for 4 decades about film, art, and photography. She transitioned at the age of 67 after downloading an app on her phone that had a gender-swapping feature, allowing Lucy to see herself as a woman. Earlier this year, she published a book called I Heard Her Call My Name, a Memoir of Transition, which brings together 2 threads of personal narrative. The first, the arc of her life, and the second, her recent transition that allowed her to reach a place of inner and outer alignment. Jane was lucky enough to speak with Lucy about this journey, so let's get into
it. So, how do you feel after 3 months of kind of doing the rounds about the book? How does that feel?
Well, it's emotionally exhausting, and it's primed to set off frequent and terrible bursts of dysphoria. I'm using that in the sense of these attacks of loss of self-confidence, gender-related imposter syndrome, that kind of dysphoria. But on the other hand, it's very clarifying. It feels so normal. This is the thing that, one of the many paradoxes of being trans is that every day at some point I'll think, literally, after over 3 years now, I'll think, holy potatoes, how I'm actually doing this. Yeah, and I've been doing it for 35 months. At the same time, it just feels utterly normal. When I just spent part of the afternoon at my local car repair, sitting in this crowded room with all kinds of locals, dogs, people coming in and out constantly. I just felt at home, and it felt like everybody treated me like I, was one of them. And that's just what my life feels like. I think it probably has a lot to do with my age. I'm not a sexual threat to anybody. I'm inert as far as the population goes. I've got the invisibility of the older woman, and then the fact that, especially when I'm not putting on an act. This is my voice. I was going to have voice surgery, but I had to record my audio book before my date came up, so that was that. And I think people just don't know what to make of me, really. I think that's a lot of it. I live in, by the way, so we situate ourselves. I live in, small city, kind of provincial capital, actually very briefly capital of the state after the revolution. And it's a river port. It's 90 miles or so north of New York City. And it was very rustic because we're at the base of the Catskills. But it's getting populated. I've been here for between 25 and 30 years, all told. My son grew up here and stuff, and I taught at Bard College across the river for 24 years. So that's where I'm at.
That's home.
Yeah, that's home.
Yeah. In terms of, I think one of the things about your book, it's told in such a beautiful literary way, really accessible, but very charming. And for anybody listening, totally recommended. What it did really nicely was identify that gender dysphoria isn't a phase. you lived with this basically for a very, very long time. 9, I think you
60
identified.
years, give or take.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Like 7 lifetimes, it feels like.
yeah. And so that really important kind of insight. It made me wonder how many Lucys are there out there who don't do more
Oh
than.
God. It reminds me of this. I'm always citing this wonderful piece that appeared in The Guardian a couple of years ago now, I think 2, 3 years ago. And it was a dialogue between a cis father and his trans son. And trans son was also neurodivergent. And at one point he said that he mentioned that among neurodivergent people, the rate of transness, which is a word I've been told not to use because it makes it sound like an ideology. Anyway, whatever, transness, the incident is like much higher than in the regular overall population. Um, it's like 3 times as much or 4 times as much or so, something like that. And he pointed out that it's not because neurodivergent people are more likely to be trans, it's because neurodivergent people can't lie,
Ooh.
right?
Oh, yeah. It's certainly, you also mentioned in some of the correspondence you get, oh God, in response to your coming out letter and your subsequent communications, you were getting them from cis men who were sort of quietly saying, wistfully,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of that, really. Yeah.
Yeah, so much containment. There's a lot of research actually in the US, which when it's around sexuality, sexual identity, that highlights there's this really dissonant kind of thing going on where people say this and then experience or contain or have these other
Mm,
desires, senses of who they are, all of this kind of all around that space. There's stuff at play that doesn't fit into these normalization
right.
boxes.
And of course, the reaction. Ay, ay, ay. I feel like I'm leading a charmed life, but I'm well aware of all those. I mean, and especially and the kids, this is one
Yeah.
thing that, aside and apart from anything else, if you had referred to me as a child when I was 16, I would have punched your daylights out. I thought that was the biggest insult. I mean, I
Yeah.
was at 11. At 11, I decided I was no longer going to patronize the children's wing of the library because I was now reading adult books. That's the kind of kid I was.
Yeah.
If I
Mark,
could,
you had an
I
extraordinary
wasn't
upbringing.
allowed to drive, but I'm sorry.
You had an extraordinary upbringing there, Lucy. I mean, it was you were kind of between continents,
Mm.
languages. You were a smart and different kid.
Yeah, I was isolated is what that is, I was cast adrift. I mean, couldn't turn to my family, didn't have friends to turn to. I was just going around in circles.
For you, from then through to when you kind of announced Lucy in your 60s, it was software for you that was a trigger to be able to see
Yeah,
yourself.
weirdly, huh? Right. Especially
Yeah.
somebody as tech averse as me, and an
That's
AI
not lost on me.
basically. Ew, it's kind of creepy, but on the other hand, the fact is that when I saw those pictures, I mean, there was, yeah, I mean, what I describe in the book, I was seeing my past life, my alternate past life flashed across my vision. Yes, that's who I would have been in 1981, absolutely, without a doubt. Somehow the AI knew this. Don't know how. They got the hair right, they got the clothes. They fudge a lot, these AIs, but basically it communicated the drift. But it wasn't only that, it was also the contrivance of it, that these were like, it's an ID card photo and there's some smudgy Instamatic pictures, and then like formal studio pictures, and that it got the textures of all these things right. And half my career is writing about photography. I'm obsessed with this stuff. Um, and so the idea that, the appeal to my photographic interests, and also I love the paradox of having fiction as proof of reality. You know what I
Mm.
mean?
Yeah, yeah, very cool.
I don't know, it's like Borgesian or something. I love that. So put them all together, and the minute my egg cracked, which by the way, I didn't invent that phrase. I keep having to tell people, no, that's trans talk. Seriously. The minute my egg cracked, it was also the minute that I realized, oh my God, I've got a book here. And so my focus wasn't even like immediately on my own transition, but on the phenomenon of these amazing pictures. And I
Well,
even went on one of the Reddit transforms to say, look, you can like retroactively come out, using this handy trick. And I think I got like 3 likes on this Reddit transform for that.
oh, really?
Anyway, yeah.
I thought it was a really interesting gesture, and I love the way you used pictures in the book.
Hmm.
And I was fascinated that we didn't get to page 201, where there was older Lucy. And I went, oh, hello, Lucy. And I was fascinated by that. I wondered if it was hard to, because you'd been playing with it, to retrofit younger Lucy. Was it hard to kind of face age and Lucy in the same space?
Um, it wasn't that bad, really. In fact, there's a younger appearing Lucy, which is actually Lucy at the age of um 45 or something like, they will make everybody look more youthful and give everybody a bit of makeup, including 11, 12-year-old me there. So, there's limits to how finally you can control it. You have to give up something to randomness.
Yeah, it's interesting as, a woman in this cultural space
Hmm.
where we are surrounded by messages that are youthfulness is everything,
Hmm.
to understand how that experience plays out when you've met yourself and kind of manifested into this age averse culture, but you've been able to do so through this trajectory of youthful
But
Lucy.
also, even I think even more importantly, really, is the fact that I have a lot of old friends, women who are very elegant, my age. I've seen them over the decades. I know what it's like to age. Some people age, people age all kinds of different ways at different rates. There's no accounting for it, but there's a way in which you can age and still maintain that brio, still, um, refuse to go gently into that good night and all that kind of shit. Um, I see this in my contemporaries, I don't have to resort to technology to do it, really.
And so that imposter syndrome that you mentioned at the beginning was a strong theme that ran through your book. But I also like the fact that you identified that maybe some of that was coming from Catholicism, and maybe some
Yeah.
of it was from coming into a different country. And how big a part do those things play sitting in behind for you, do you think?
Well, they're not acute memories anymore. They're just kind of the background noise. But, I had a rough time when I was a kid and I felt very isolated. Um, I only started, feeling like I had a social world in high school,
Right.
and all through, well, especially junior high, which is rough for everybody. Junior high, I say. It's now called middle school in America.
Right.
I don't know what you call it there. Um, but it's in my day, it was junior high. Um, And that's just a terrible period. And I had no friends at all during that whole period. And that's, that whole period of my realizing that I was trans, although could I, I didn't, the available language was not there. There was no available language for me. I didn't even think there was anybody else who was inflicted by this,
Mm.
for a while. Um, and um, and I was also, like a kid who read books in a place where not many kids read for fun, and none of them were boys. Um, and It was a town, it was a town poised between the old Italian working class and the new commuters to New York City. And we fit in nowhere. And my parents had no friends. My parents were isolated. There wasn't an immigrant community of any sort because the United States had almost no immigration in those years. And not until 1965 did they repeal the Chinese Exclusion Act, for example, and let in other peoples from around the world. Um, when we emigrated, there were it took me 10 years to meet two immigrant kids.
That's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just crazy. So I felt, dropped from the moon anyway, even beyond the trans stuff, you
Yeah.
know? And I don't know, I moved funny. Every aspect of my walking, standing, sitting was made fun of by other kids, and I couldn't really see myself. I still don't know. What was the deal there? Did it look feminine or just look dweebish? I have no idea.
To layer in then the experience of dysphoria
Hmm.
and that to be about cultural identity and gender identity at the same time. You must be made of
Yeah.
quite resilient stuff because you're still here.
And then when I grew up and went to New York City for university and stayed there apparently for the rest of my life and started encountering the presence of trans people
Mm.
in really in my social circle, I was too terrified to ever speak to either of them. Um, I mean, the trans women and who I'd see at parties. Um, but they were, there was the difference that there were trans women around, but they were a subset of gay male culture. They were into men. I wasn't into men, I was into women. And that was a major difference, especially since, I'd read pieces in the Village Voice about, these columnists scornfully dumping on the notion of what they termed heterosexual transvestites or something like that.
Yeah.
In other words, transbians, as we'd say nowadays, they doubted the existence of, as if they were like, your average bigots from
Yeah.
Kalamazoo. Um, so it wasn't really until the 21st century where I learned a lot from the internet. This kind of information just was not available before the internet. You had to do a lot of digging. You had to do a lot of research. You had to go to places I was afraid to go to get clues as to where to look, basically.
Yeah.
And but suddenly online there it was. And at the same time, teaching, and I was teaching undergraduates for 24 years, and I saw this wave come, and it was interesting because I taught there for a good 10 years before I started noticing suddenly a bunch of non-binary kids and they them pronouns. And then after a while, trans kids started appearing. And that's what really good gave me courage, is being
Nice.
among young people who were completely chill about it. That was another thing that used to put me off about the trans people I'd see, was that I loved watching them. It was such performance, but I wasn't interested in that kind of performance. I like performance of a certain kind, right? I'm a performer when I do my readings, that kind of thing. I perform. But to maintain a pose, it comes from this late 60s idea of the life actor, which is not necessarily a trans or even gay thing. It comes from acting. It comes from like living theater, but they talked about a life actor, the people who just enact a role in life, and which is something you'd see in the streets, really. And it's very close to what might look like schizophrenia sometimes, but also it had this thing which merged with camp, where people were, acting. Like I used to go see Jackie Curtis when she'd sub at the bar that her grandmother owned, which is near where I lived on the Lower East Side. And there was never a minute that Jackie wasn't performing. She was fully human. And, I mean, I loved watching her. She was enthralling. She was very smart. She was very sensitive. But she was performing all the time. I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to be me,
Yeah.
I wanted to be me as a woman, um, and um, and I didn't really start seeing that possibility until Generation Z, Generation Z, pardon me, people 40 years my juniors.
Mm.
I owe it all to them.
Well, that's very cool. Is there anything that you could have said to yourself that might have given you courage earlier?
Anything I could have said to myself? Well, I mean, the only thing really, I had a therapist in the late 80s, early 90s, and I confessed that I had tried on my mother's clothes on more than one occasion. And then I bottled it up again. And then, not immediately, but maybe a few weeks or month or two later, he died of a massive heart attack 20 minutes after I left the office.
Ah,
And I keep thinking, if Pavel had lived,
right.
eventually he would have gotten it out of me. I might have transitioned 25 years earlier than I did. Who knows?
Wow. Sliding door moment.
Mm.
One of the things that I'm currently kind of re-noticing, I guess, is the very gendered nature of the world that we are in. And it feels
Mhm.
like I don't know, is it just me? Does it feel more so? Like, is it
You
because it's
know,
all visible now?
well, that's it. It's a period of retrenchment and fighting back by men who, I mean, like all bullies, they cannot share power. For them, if anybody else steps up to take some portion of the power, they have been robbed of all power. And since men have been losing status steadily, I mean, for 100 years, read, I used to read this anthropologist named Marvin Harris, it talked about like all these ups and downs of feminism in terms of the labor market. When women were needed on the workforce, sexism became less apparent all of a
Yeah.
sudden, you know, and then men would be uh, back from the war, and the women would just have to disappear into the shadows. Um, so there's a lot of that. But the thing about I mean, I do not understand trans exclusionary radical feminists, because the only people who benefit from transphobia, the only institution that is benefits from transphobia is male supremacy. It's the only institution that will lose. Um, because how can you maintain the fiction of male supremacy when you have deserters, when the lines are blurred, when it might be a spectrum after all? Holy cow. Having trans women around cannot, I mean, yeah, okay, we do not have the reproductive anatomy, and therefore we are lacking one of the major sales points of the woman on the marketplace, which is the reproductive factor. At the same time, you can't say that we haven't been beat up on ourselves in
Mm.
different sorts of ways. In fact, beat up on so thoroughly that in much of the world we are invisible, you know. But so, anyway, not to like compare crucifixions or anything, but
But there is, the stats are clear. I mean, it's pretty tough living in the trans world, and there's a lot of reason to reach out and create space and be supportive. The debate with feminism, as an old lefty feminist from way back, is interesting. I was reading a piece this morning from Sydney reporting on somebody who's now going to court in Australia with a provider an app because they've excluded her on the grounds that she's trans because it's a safe women's space. And that's an example of exclusion that doesn't make any sense.
I don't know that one specifically, but I'll tell you, it reminds me of, I have this friend with whom I had a difficult breakup, and she's gay. She almost transitioned herself. I mentioned her in the book until she realized that testosterone was going to change her voice, and she's a singer. Well, the same person was, she was presenting it as these safe women's spaces. Um, it's the presence, it's the fact that there might be penises involved, and these women have been raped or otherwise have been traumatized by the male anatomy.
That's that whole space of trying to exclude any woman from a safe space seems to me we really got to find ways to talk with each other about this and understand that we're in such a aggressively violent world, and safety should include any women, all women,
Mhm.
in its space, and we have to find ways to talk for you, and you can only speak for you, obviously. Can you share with us a bit the joy of transition?
Of course. It's, well, first of all, I got, this is very particular to me, but getting rid of this whole embedded system of secrets within secrets. It's like I got rid of the Stasi, you know? I'm East Germany when the day they got rid of the Stasi. Um, it's incredible, these concrete bunkers I built up in and around myself. Um, Secondly, it's remarkable not to hate myself anymore.
Mm.
I like myself now. I'm happy to, I will step forward. I will speak. I'll walk into whatever that joint is. I can do that stuff where for years it was like, I don't know. Maybe what I'm about to say is stupid, so I shouldn't say it. I mean, this is a lifetime of this. The thing is, at a certain crucial point in my life, partly because of my boss, who I mentioned, all blessings to her, Barbara Epstein, who let me see that as riddled with self-doubt as I might be, I could separate my opinions from that, and I had ironclad faith in my opinions, and that's what enabled me to be a writer, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Um, but the fact is that now there is not even that distinction. My opinions are come out of me, and I like me. I'm fine with me. I represent myself. I'm giving my best face to the world. Um, and sometimes I do think, you're you're an imposter. You're a wig on a stick. You're an old man. That's the most wounding. But the fact is, it doesn't last, and overall, part of it does happen out in the world, especially since I've been giving so many interviews,
Mm.
that afterwards there's like a little collapse, because it expends a lot of emotional energy. But um, and then the other problem is, I live by myself in a town that where I really don't know many people at all. I have a few friends here and there in the surrounding landscape, but most of my socializing is done in New York City, where I haven't lived for 25 years. Um, so, I'm a bit alienated, but the great thing about representing myself is that I'm among people. And when I'm among people, suddenly I feel better about myself by and large, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's it's the experience. Well, I mean, I mentioned that pink cloud, and
Yeah.
in the first year, I mean, for me, it was like 2.5 years or something, or 2 years that that pink cloud eventually subsided. But I would, have transports of euphoria.
Mm.
In fact, in the beginning, it was like immobilizing. I'd be like flung back in my chair for a day. I'd be quaking. I mean, it was ecstasy. Really, like I mentioned, I was Bernini's Saint Teresa. Saint Teresa in ecstasy. That was me.
Oh.
Um, and now it's quieted down, but it's more like serenity.
Mm.
It's more, you know, I am on my lily pad in the pond floating, you know. I feel very good.
That's a really nice image.
I mean, I'm lonely, it's a lonely thing, I gotta say. But
Mm.
but I do my best.
Is there anything that you would like to say or touch on that I haven't asked about as part of that kind of message to the world about your book?
Well, one thing that I say all the time now, even though, a lot of this is in part preaching to the converted, blah, 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 but I want to make it clear that um being transgender is not a choice. It's not, it's hard. It's not about sex. It's sex adjacent, but everything in life is sex adjacent. It's a physical fact. Right? It's not, it affects the psychology. It's not, believe, can't prove this, but I believe that it's a physiological fact. It's something like being left-handed or being double jointed or being albino. And it's probably, I mean, I'm a little confused by this because I do believe in the fluidity of gender, but in terms of people being drawn to flipping from one binary to the other, as was the case with my generation, I think it's kind of it must be a set portion of the population. Anyway, we've been here since there have been people probably, and it's been repressed for reasons of male supremacy. Also,
Mm.
probably in the same way that homosexuality in some cultures was repressed because uh, babies were to be mass produced, you know. Everything I'm an old Marxist that I believe everything has an economic substratum. Um, and yeah, that's basically it. I mean, I think um, it's, being transphobic is against like being against people with two different color eyes.
Agree, 100% agree. Lucy, it's such a pleasure. It was a privilege to read your work, and I don't know if we're ever in the same space somehow. It'd be really nice to catch up.
Yes, yes. Okay. Great to meet you.
We really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Before we sign off, we wanted to remind you to check out our 2 books that we have available: How to Talk with Your Kids About Porn and The Organ Education Forgot. These are both available as downloadable PDFs or in print, and you can head over to sexandspace.com to grab your copy. If you do, not only will you be educating yourself about a very important subject, but you'll also be supporting us in all the work that we do. If you'd like to support us in other ways, we'd love for you to buy some merch, which is also available on our website, and we have both mugs and t-shirts. As always, thank you so much for listening and being on this journey with us. Until next time, safe travels and see you on the next episode.